Welcome back. We're talking with former US Secretary of Homeland Security Michael Chertoff, who's just written a book on his experiences in the Bush administration and warning Americans not to get too complacent about their safety. Homeland Security, assessing the first 5 years, is being released in the US on Tuesday and internationally later in September. Let's get back to our discussion with a call from Bosnia. Garrett, your question, please.
Yes, I just wanted to ask Mr. Chertoff, does he think that the American administration made two key mistakes under Bush? One was funding the ISI with the Saudis to go into Afghanistan, and then when they were in Afghanistan, not supporting Karzai, but supporting the warlords. And effectively what they did was they created the lack of democracy that now Obama is having to deal with. Weren't these major failings of the administration?
I'm not sure I agree with the premise of the questions, but I do think it identifies two very challenging issues we have in Pakistan and in Afghanistan. Obviously, in Pakistan, we've been dealing with the challenge of the frontier areas, which have been safe havens for terrorism and have also, by the way, posed a threat to the central government of Pakistan. And what we want to do is we want to work with those elements of the government, including the leadership, the democratic leadership of Pakistan, to give them the tools they need to exert control and to protect their own institutions from terrorism, including, for example, the assassination of Benazir Bhutto. In Afghanistan, the challenge we face, of course, is it's a very decentralized state. And you've got to strike a balance between supporting the central government, building its institutions, but recognizing that local government and local tribes have traditionally played a big role. And that balance, I think, is a very tough, tall order, and it's one which we've done some good work on, but is going to require further application.
Now, of course, looking at the way America reacted in the post-9/11 era, the level of security, the reaction, of course, everyone has the experience going through airports, yourself included.
Yes.
Did America overreact? Was there too much of a response to the threat, to the point where it actually was detrimental to America's image overseas, but also to the quality of life of Americans?
Well, I think the initial reaction, of course, in facing an unprecedented threat was to do everything that we needed to do in order to prevent a follow-on attack. Since then, we have, in fact, made some adjustments and recalibrated. For example, there was a time you couldn't get on an airplane with a nail clipper. Now we've relaxed some of those restrictions. As we've gotten better information, we've managed to craft a set of restrictions that I think have actually made it easier to get into the United States. And we abolished some of the programs that I think were the most difficult for travelers. Now, no doubt people will still complain sometimes, but having gone through a fair number of airports since I've left, and the border as well, I think things have actually eased up quite a bit.
Now, of course, there was a whole wave of change when Barack Obama was elected. America's image changed. The response globally has been amazing. We had a question or comment that came in, or question and comment that came in from Vijay Prashad from Facebook, who wrote in saying, "The real issue is, why has the Obama administration not renounced the Bush doctrine? That might send a clearer message to the world and make America safer."
Well, of course, different people have different ideas of what the so-called Bush doctrine is. I think there is a lot of continuity between what the Bush administration did and what the Obama administration is doing, simply because, and this may surprise people sometimes in other parts of the world, there's generally a consensus view in the United States on the need to take national security seriously. And I think both Republicans and Democrats care a great deal about preventing attacks. No doubt there are some adjustments, again, at the margin and some in the way things are explained. But frankly, anybody who is an observer of American history over the years is not surprised to see a great deal of continuity as well.
Although one thing that the post-9/11 era did reveal was how the agencies really didn't work in collaboration. I mean, the lack of cooperation was actually quite startling to a lot of people. How has that changed? I mean, has there been any real effort to unite the intelligence agencies?
I can tell you in the 8-year period between the time I was at the Department of Justice on September 11th, 2001 and the time I left in January 2009, I saw an enormous difference, enormous improvement in information sharing and coordination and cooperation, not only between the Department of Justice and the intelligence community, but with Department of Homeland Security, which was a new agency that was founded in 2003. So here again, I think there's been a lot of improvement and a good foundation on which to continue to build.
The DHS, which you headed up, I mean, it seems to be a strange mishmash of agencies. It seemed to bring together a lot of separate and very sometimes what seem to be unrelated agencies.
Well, actually, as they say, there is a theme to the pudding, and the theme is protecting the borders and the infrastructure of the country. So we brought together all the border agencies, Customs and Border Protection, the Coast Guard. We added the Infrastructure Protection Agency, TSA, which handles transportation. We have the response agency, because sometimes the right way to deal with an emergency is to respond appropriately rather than to be able to prevent something. And by bringing them together, we were able to create a unified capability to plan and execute. It's taken a while to mature the agency, but I have to say, in 2008, looking back, I think we've come a considerable distance.
But it's huge, 50 billion budget and 218,000 people. It must be rather unwieldy.
It is large, although not the largest. Of course, the Department of Defense is many orders of magnitude larger, as is the Veterans Administration, interestingly enough.
We have a call on the line from Virginia. Mayor, what would you like to ask?
The thing is, Mr. Michael always talks about Homeland Security. I think Mr. Michael speaks about the people who were killed and the security situation and all those things. Even Obama says 3,000 people were killed on that day and so on and so forth. What about the 3 million before and 3 million after? And the money that is being spent on the internal security and all those 50 million,
okay.
50 billion,
Mayor?
that money can be well spent by changing just the policy.
Thanks, Mayor. Do you see a change? Do you see something moving forward where perhaps under the Obama administration there might be some kind of streamlining where the money that's being used, a lot of it that was used in terms of defense and security, might actually be now used to help the infrastructure of the U.S. and create a greater internal security?
Well, I think one of the things which I speak about in the book is the need to make sure that we do take care to pay attention to our infrastructure. You know, certainly in terms of protecting ourselves, one element of a strategy, not a whole strategy, is to have resiliency and to have less vulnerability, and that means making sure that our critical infrastructure is supported and is repaired and rehabilitated, and we have a certain amount of redundancy. Now, of course, much of that is in the hands of the private sector, and the private sector ought to take responsibility for maintaining and improving its own infrastructure. A big element is cybersecurity. That's an area where I think we've started to pay a lot of attention, but we need to really invest in making sure our computer systems are protected.
Let's see if we can get in Reginald from Fiji. Reginald, your question, please.
Take a holistic approach to the whole thing. If you look at world history, then we have to think that of America as a passing entity in the world, and its policy must change. I mean, Obama has to not become a political puppet. He has to stand his ground and say, let's do good in the world. I think America is a more agitator than a peacemaker. Thank you.
Okay, do you see, again?
Well, I think America does do good. You know, one of the things that is often not remarked is the amount of aid and assistance Americans give, for example, to the victims of the tsunamis in South Asia, or what we're doing in Africa with respect to the program to combat malaria and AIDS, which President Bush really pushed forward. And maybe Americans sometimes aren't focused enough on taking credit for these things, but I can tell you there are millions of lives that have been saved because of American medical care and pharmaceuticals that have been distributed in aid all around the world, and I think that's always been an important element of the American spirit.
Of course, your work through the justice system and through Department of Homeland Security makes you valuable property now with the Chertoff Group. Who's looking for your business? What are they looking for? Well,
what we're doing is, for example, we're advising people who are interested in investing in Homeland Security about what is the nature of the market, what is Homeland Security. And this, by the way, includes not just counterterrorism, it involves things like public health. We're working with people who want to invest in the kinds of mechanisms we use to deal with H1N1 or other kinds of biological threats. So across the board, internationally, corporations, governments, again, we're taking the skills that we developed and trying to apply them more generally. And if we can help people make their lives better, that's really a very positive achievement.
Now, certainly internationally, where are you finding the interest from? Do you find, for example, the Gulf nations, you know, they've had, depending on where you look, have had varying relationships with the U.S. Do you find you still get business there?
I think we get interest from all around the world. I think we get it in the Middle East, we get it in Asia, we get it in Europe, because for many people, America really was the path breaker in dealing with Homeland Security after September 11th. And many of the systems we developed for emergency management or for dealing with these kinds of threats are now being adopted, for example, by the Europeans or by people in the Middle East, whether it's biometrics, better control of who enters the border, better security for infrastructure. And so that kind of expertise, when you spread it around the world, actually makes everybody safer, including Americans.
Now, is there in terms of the way civil liberties have gone, do you think there is a lesson to be learned from what's happened in the past 8 years?
Well, I think, again, you know, you always want to strike a balance. You want to make sure that you're not sacrificing your fundamental liberties, but you also have to recognize that in an environment of great danger to human life, you have to be prepared to make some adjustments at the margin. And I think on balance, we have done a good job with that. Nothing's perfect, but as time has passed, we've made calibrations and recalibrations. I think one of the things that's disappointing is that Congress has not actually legislated in a way that would make it as easy to do some of these things as we'd like.
Well, sir, I want to thank you very much for your time.
Great. Good to be on.
Thank you. And thank you for being with us. On the next show, retired 4-star General Anthony Zinni talks about his 35 years in the Marine Corps and how his work in the armed forces applies to the corporate world. Remember, you can also follow the program on Facebook, add your comments and questions there. From me and the team, we'll see you next time.